Managers are often the most burned out population in organizations. This is because they absorb the pressure from above and the emotional load from below. So, what do I mean by this? Is they have the pressure from leadership above them, who's pushing down, looking at metrics and saying, why isn't this done? We need to get this done. Here's the new focus. Here's the new direction or the new rules that have come out from law and how to do things, right? And that's a lot of pressure to figure that out. And then it's from the bottom, people they supervise who are emotionally saying, I can't keep going. I don't know how else to do this. It's a hard squeeze. It's a how do you support and how do you make sure things happen? And so managers are going to get burnt out a lot quicker, right? They're expected to execute those strategies and help regulate their people simultaneously, along with, I'm going to put in there regulating themselves, right? As a leader, it's a trifold process, and that can be a lot. And it's important to recognize that most interventions ignore them. Most interventions are not designed for the leader, but the leader is the infrastructure, right? So when we're talking about burnout and that middle squeeze, it is a leadership infrastructure problem that we need to look at. And this squeeze that we're talking about shows up in increased scope without increased authority. So if from that top down, they're getting told do more of these things, add these things to your plate, but wait, you don't have the authority to make decisions. You have to run everything past us. What does that do? Right? That puts more pressure on the leader and kind of leaves them stuck a little bit. They need to have some of that authority. A lot of times there's conflicting priorities from multiple stakeholders. So as a leader, it's which project, which stakeholder do I prioritize? Because there's pull from so many, because they're all important. But it creates that squeeze again, right? Because everybody wants something and they all want it now. There is an emotional labor where recovery is not there. Leaders can struggle to have the bandwidth to recover because they are pulled in multiple directions. And there's a lot going on and a lot of things they have to juggle. What about the performance pressure with limited control, right? Again, teams are supposed to perform at a certain level, have a certain output, but who has the control on how that output happens? That puts a lot of pressure on people. In the middle management, there's a lot of times this chronic ambiguity, which leads to cognitive overload, where we're just not certain, not black and white on how we can go about things, especially if we're not given authority. And so we have to be careful that this ambiguity itself and the cognitive overload is not what's burning leaders out, because it absolutely will play a factor in that. And we need to help create some systems that will prevent our leaders from burning out. Because if you have a good leader, you want them to stick around. You don't want to see them go out the door. And so, how does manager burnout affect organizations? Because it can affect it at a dangerous level, right? And this happens because burned out managers can burn out the teams. So, if managers are struggling to find the right systems or create the right workflows, teams are suffering. If leaders can't recover themselves, then their teams are feeling that emotional strain from the leader, because culture in an organization is transmitted through the managers. Managers help create the culture. The culture is often centered around who that manager is, how they work with the team. So we have to pay attention to that. When managers and leaders are burnt out, we're gonna see engagement issues. So again, right, employees who pull back from meetings, they just don't engage. Maybe they're doing the bare minimum to just get by. Retention of employees is going to start to drop. Because if the leader is struggling, people don't want to stay under that. And safety that depends on them starts to shift. This is where the leadership pipeline erodes because leadership is part of what makes or breaks an organization. And we have to have healthy leaders to have healthy cultures in organizations. And we need to prioritize their well-being and the systems that support that, right? Because if leadership collapses, the organizational resilience collapses quietly. And most organizations do not realize they have a burnout problem, a culture problem, until it is too late and they already have multiple people headed out the door. And so we have to explore why traditional leadership development can fail managers. Because traditional leadership development programs, they focus mostly on skills of being a leader, how to resolve conflict, but they don't include nervous system capacity and nervous system regulation. It's all about the interpersonal skills and the tactical pieces of doing the job. These leadership development programs don't focus on redesigning of workload expectations that are necessary to having a thriving culture and organization. They don't focus on that emotional load support. So how do people support each other when they're emotionally overloaded? We need to start including these in our development programs, making sure people know how to regulate themselves, how they can support others who emotionally are struggling. Right now, there's no systemic protection for managers. We have to build that in, right? Because managers are trained to perform. They're not trained to sustain. We're all about, can managers perform and make sure the output happens and oversee all these projects? What about the sustainability? And this is the sustainability for the leader, but for the organization, right? Because leaders should be creating systems that can thrive and keep moving in healthy ways if they take time off to take care of themselves and model that, right? But we don't. We just train them to perform. This is the metrics you have to hit, and that's the only thing that matters. But we have to be cautious of that. And so if we flip the script a little bit, what does a burnout resilient organization do for managers? When we've talked in the previous video about creating systems that support healthy workflows, we look at reducing role overload and conflicting demands. So we have to support prioritization and how to get things done. And I know some of you are probably like, that's not how the world works. Well, I get that, but we have to push back a little bit. Because what I can tell you in my experience as a manager and as a leader is that when I had the autonomy to determine my schedule and know what my outputs and my metrics were, I could create workflows that worked for me, where I maintained my well-being and I got things done in less time because the expectations were healthy. It wasn't about, oh, you need to be at work 50 hours a week. It was, this is what I need you to take care of. I'm going to trust you to do it. That's where the role overload was reduced, was because I was given some autonomy, and we need to make sure managers have that. We have to give that autonomy through clarifying what decisions they can make and how things are prioritized, right? Priorities can come and go, and they change based on deadlines, contracts, seasons. there has to be some adjustment. As an organization, we need to build in recovery into leadership workflows. We need to do that for the entire organization and system. Recovery time has to be built in. People will function at higher capacity when they have those recovery time built in. It's important that we make sure leaders are trained in stress and capacity management, meaning leaders need to have some training around emotional intelligence and how to support people in regulating their nervous system and managing their energy levels and their stress. It can't just be about tactical workflows and tactical projects. It has to be a little more personal than that. So when we create support systems for leadership, specifically those that are kind of in that middle management and they feel squeezed, we're going to have a culture that is resilient and recovers quicker because the support is there. So when we're working on that support, we have to have targeted and very specific interventions in order to help managers with burnout. We can't fix culture if we don't support managers in their own journey. Because again, many things in organizations start at the top. So to fix the culture, we have to explore what's going on in leadership. Leadership is the leverage point. They can't be the afterthought. So it can't just be more wellness perks for employees. What does leadership need to be well and sustain? When we support managers, we are protecting our teams and our outcomes. I have walked that journey and I've seen it time and again. When teams are supported, when people are seen as people and treated as people, not a cog in a wheel, the outcomes are there. The metrics are there. Because leaders are a force multiplier and they're an investment, right? So when you invest in your people and your leaders, you're going to get the return. So think about manager recovery as an organizational risk mitigation, because burnout is a risk, right? It causes accidents. So now you have workman's comp to deal with. It causes more illness. So you have people taking time off work that don't normally. So if you're saying, oh, a lot of this resonates, how do I fix it? Schedule a consultation and let's chat. It's linked below. Because if you're ready to create effective strategies, do a risk assessment, a diagnostic on your culture, let's chat. When you identify where your middle leadership strain is impacting your performance, then we can identify what to do about it, because it can come back. You can recover from it. And so remember, we can't scale performance on burned out managers. The leadership health is organizational health. They are synonymous together, because managers don't just run teams. They run the culture of your organization. So let's make it healthy.